Hi everyone. Thank you all for coming. I am Amy Hildreth, and we have an excellent panel today here to talk to you guys about rejection resilience and how do you get over your grant rejection and pick yourself up and resubmit and have a successful application in the future. Dr. Rebecca Cole had the idea for this talk and is so amazing she's getting an award and so couldn't be here. But so we're gonna talk it through without her. If I could just have everybody say hi and introduce themselves.
All right, so I suppose we go first because I'm closest to the podium. Michael Gottlieb, I'm at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. I'm our Vice Chair of Research, also I'm the Division Director, and have had a very long list of grant failures and a small list of grant successes. And I'm excited to kind of share lessons learned and strategies because ultimately that I found talking to tons of people is a pretty common theme, right? Is that we throw way more darts at the dartboard than actually land. And so hopefully to share some expertise and to hopefully continue to help y'all grow in the same way.
I'm Wendy Coates. I'm from UCLA. I'm emeritus professor there and spent my career doing things like an education research. I'm an education scientist, qualitative methodologist. And I would like to just say that if you're ever looking for like an interesting decoration for your wall, instead of wallpaper, you might choose all the rejection letters that you get from the grants that don't get funded instead, because they're usually priceless from like Xerox 600 times, so there's all those little black dots even today, to like, dear, and then there's nothing else. And we sincerely regret, so it's just, if you're feeling frustrated, welcome to the club. And we're here to make it better for you.
Holly Corona-Wire, Associate for Admissions and Assessment at Stanford, also an education researcher. Yeah, and I think I'm to the point now where I just get rejection letters and I'm just go on to the next one. I think it's one of those things where you put all the love and attention into something and someone says they don't like it, that hurts, but at the same time, I've come to the conclusion it's not about me.
It's not about you. Dr. Yang also is supposed to be here and unfortunately is serving jury duty. So we have a slightly truncated panel. We have no disclosures. We're going to try to cover these objectives. The kind of where this talk came from is really our shared history of grant rejections, which is very, very common. 90% of proposals, almost half of manuscripts get rejected. So this, if it's like my advisor said in residency, if you're not getting M&Ms, you're not seeing enough patients. If you're not getting rejections, you're not submitting enough. But this can lead to burnout, and there's limited education on how to manage it. So how can we build resilience and get better at this? So we wanted to just ask questions, and if anyone has questions that they want to ask, please jump in. But we can start with this idea of how do you use the feedback that you get to make things better?
I suppose
We're gonna keep starting with you, Michael.
Oh, fun. That's what I get for sitting out of the seat.
Yeah.
So yeah, grants are kind of a unique thing because I often get, I start in editorial boards and I talk about things about papers and we talk about how to ping pong your paper. And there's some similarities in how we approach grants, right? You want to generally kind of follow a similar model in the beginning, which is take a second, you see the rejection, let it sit away from your mind for a day or two. Nothing good comes from that. Like that first kind of shock that happens in there. There's usually a tendency to do one of two things. Either get totally demotivated, the heck with this, not done. Or get angry, some version of the 5 stages of now grief, you stop there. Or to try to hyper react and try to make a bunch of changes really quickly that may actually not be aligned with what you wanted to do. Because the reviewer isn't always right, and sometimes the direction they're doing is to move you towards a mechanism as opposed to moving you towards the science you want to do. So first, and that's again just a commonality of all papers, all things, give yourself some breathing room to process this. There's never a scenario where this needs to be done in the first 48 hours, ever. First 48 hours, process it. Okay, so you decided that. Then go back and look at the comments. Take a second and say, all right, can I address this? And can I address this and still do the science I want to do? Because for grants, it's a little bit different. For papers, almost every paper, unless there's some major methodological flaw, I can find a journal. I will run it down there, down the list, and I'll find one. But that doesn't always apply to grants. Some grants, you look at it and you say, you know what? This isn't ready, or this need, or I need to do something else first. And I'm not going to keep kicking that and throwing it at the wall over and over again, because that is actually a really good way of getting burnt out, because you'll just find failure after failure because it's a grant issue. Instead, I say, all right, what are the next things? Do I need to shift my focus, or do I need to kind of just let this one fall off as a project? And I'll give you a case example. So it's my own, grant process. One of the submissions I put in a R01 grant, looking at how to implement a study using a hybrid implementation study of ultrasound in pre-symptomatic heart failure. And it's going to be an implementation study because there's a lot of evidence. I've done some preliminary work and I said, you know what? This study has good, we know that 60% of patients with hypertension had asymptomatic heart failure. Also on changes management, I had this thing, I presented this grant. I spent, I don't know how many hours on this, how many days, how many weeks on this grant, living this grant. And it got unscored. And my first thing I was like, how? And I kind of so I put it in the drawer, gave it 2 days. I went back to it and I read through the comments with a little bit fresher eyes and said, you're right. It wasn't ready for an implementation grant. It was an implementation mechanism. I think it was an implementation grant. They were right. They were actually totally right to reject it. It wasn't ready there. So now we're doing a different grant that's going to get the preliminary work to go back and do that same grant in probably 3 years. But if I kept saying, well, no, you're wrong, and keep banging my head against the wall, instead of having something which will hopefully be a successful grant in a number of years, I would have just kept getting burnt out, and that's the process. And so we're putting in, I got a successful different grant that was pre-work. We got a couple of philanthropic studies to get some funding for it. But being okay letting a grant either sit on back burner or go away is a different mentality than papers, and I think we have to be okay with that. But we learn from every single step along the way.
So I want to maybe take a point of view of the reviewers of the grants and how we can use their feedback from their point of view. So if you think of a study section, these are people who are deeply committed to whatever that topic is. What happens in their discipline really matters to them, because what might be happening down the road as the next grant that comes in might fill a gap that they need to be able to complete their research. So they're very deeply invested. If you've ever talked to someone who's on a study section, you know that this amount of time that they spend is significant. Even if you look at an organization like the SAEM Foundation and the Grants Committee, your colleagues here within SAEM spend countless hours reviewing all of the grants that you submit to our foundation. And if you go into, grants that are hundreds of, millions of dollars, they're gonna have even more scrutiny. So these people are giving up their opportunity to work on their own grants. They're giving up the chance to be hanging out, watching Netflix and everything else to provide good feedback to you. So this is not like somebody says, hey, Mike, what do you think of this? And you're like, no, don't score that. So the feedback that they're giving you is, in most cases, valid feedback, because the way that a study section works is generally a primary and secondary, often a tertiary reviewer, so that you have somebody who owns your grant, and it's kind of their job to usher it through the process. And so they know a lot about it. So if somebody else comes up with a comment that isn't worthwhile, they can all sit down and talk about it. So the feedback that you get isn't just from one guy who's sitting, in a room with a light bulb over his head or something. This is a lot of people spending a lot of time to synthesize what you have written. The only thing they can review is what you have on paper. And I would say countless grants get rejected because the writer of the grant is so familiar with what they're doing that they assume that every single person who's reading the grant understands at least as much as they do about the grant. So I like to think about when I'm mentoring someone who's writing a grant early on in their career, I like to say, if Dr. Apoptosis Man is reading this grant, will they be able to understand what you're trying to do? And then that almost always leads to a lot of revision. So now we're at the point where you got your grant back, it got rejected, it got scored, it didn't get scored, but it didn't get funded. So those comments, consider every single line after the 2-day trial period in the drawer. And like, spend time thinking carefully about each line, and it'll probably take you almost an equivalent amount of time to rewrite that grant and revise it for the next submission cycle or to a different agency as it took you to write it in the first place, but hopefully elevating it a lot that next time around.
I'm gonna own that I've gotten Mike's advice more times than I can count. The whole put it in a drawer and ignore it for a couple of days. I rage read it the first day. It's just I have to. Because I can't ignore it. Like, I have to go through and read it and like be angry about it, and think everyone's crazy, and then put it in the drawer, and then come back to it a couple days later and be like, okay, they're right. I think for me, a lot of time, and it's advice you get, and I think a lot of us are like, oh, I did do that, but at the same time that you get the feedback, you're like, maybe I didn't actually do that. Is when you apply for the grant, making sure that you are very clearly aligned with the funding source. Because a lot of times you submit something and you're like, well, this is obliquely related. If you've had that thought, this is obliquely related, it probably isn't. You're trying to make it fit and it doesn't. And a lot of times the comments will be, this is a really cool idea, but this isn't what we intended to fund. Or this didn't fit with what it is that we were looking for. And here's why. Or you didn't quite fit with what we, there's some funders who are like, oh, we want to do like faculty, the ones where we're helping junior faculty develop, or, where they're looking to help people who are maybe mid-career get to that next phase, and it's, we're really invested in what we can provide for you. And then you're like, oh, I applied 2 years too late probably, and they don't have as much to offer me as, they're going to notice that. So it's looking at really making sure you are completely aligned with who you're applying to, and you meet all of the criteria, and that you actually read them, and ask questions. It's oftentimes you look at the grant, like the funding mechanism, and you're like, okay, here's the criteria. There are people on the other end that if you're not sure, you can ask things too. So I'll give SAEM as an example. There are rules attached to the SAEM Foundation grants, and I emailed Melissa and was like, if the funding for this specific thing is actually in service of doing the research, is that actually disallowed? Or is this something that actually will work? And she wrote back and she's like, I ran it by them, and actually you're okay with putting that in as something that you would want funded. So I think that, making sure you reach out if you have questions or you're not 100% sure, because you don't want to get your grant back after having put in all of that time and effort and been like, oh, if I would have asked, I would have known this. It's okay to rage read. I will validate your feelings. And really, again, paying attention to who it is that you're applying to, what it is, because a lot of times, a lot of the feedback you get is actually not about the science, it's about the logistics, or like the nitty gritty things. And then when you read it, there are people who are going to give you really constructive feedback about the science. So taking that to heart, whether you reapply to, they give you the opportunity to revise and reapply to the funding mechanism you apply to, or if you're going to send it to someone else, again, you're like, oh, it totally fits. Making sure you pay attention to that and address all of the things that you possibly can, because it's going to be important to do that, because otherwise someone will pick up on the exact same thing again. And then just like when you get feedback from somebody else, like in real life, who's not on the other side of a paper and is anonymous, you get feedback, and a lot of times you're like, I don't necessarily agree with all of this. take the nugget of truth, because there will be a nugget of truth from every piece of feedback, and leave the rest. So, to Wendy's point, Dr. Apoptosis fan will often be reading, so I'm an education researcher. Someone who has no idea about education or qualitative methods is going to read my grants. And keeping that in mind is really helpful. Case in point, I got a review back on a grant that actually did get funded. That was like, this is a really cool study, but you didn't include a power calculation. I'm a qualitative researcher. How in God's green earth am I going to do a power calculation? But someone didn't understand that was something that didn't happen. And I didn't talk about thematic sufficiency in the grant. I was like, well, that was my mistake. I didn't make this explicit. And so you, again, have to be very clear, like, if your audience is may not even be in the same, like, universe as your field, and you have to talk to them. And they may have no idea what you're doing. Or they may have some oblique idea about what you're doing and then extrapolate that to what they actually know. So it's helpful to have that in mind.
Thank you guys. Any thoughts about how you handle those? We have the 48-hour rule and we have the rage read rule. Any other thoughts about how we handle those feelings of rejection?
So I'll echo one point kind of how you did the end, which is the idea of there's this paper. I think it's kind of the reviewers always right.
Pretty sure.
I think so. There's a paper called The Reviewer is Always Right, and the concept is even when the reviewer is wrong, they're right. There's some nugget in there to echo that point that they didn't understand from their field. Sometimes it's explaining it in something for Dr. Apoptosis. Sometimes it's framing something so they're clear about this. And sometimes they're just right. They're actually right, and we should do it a different way. But sometimes they're right in the wrong way. They have a great idea for a study that's very expansive. It's going to cost another several zeros in the end of the amount of the grant to do what they want to do. And then it's trying to be able to frame that discussion. So some of it is just being okay with like either being proactively framing out and saying, this is the next step. This is, and there's a section at every, end of every grant, it's like potential limitations and how you can address them. And you talk through like, this is why we believe this will work here. Or maybe it's simply just explaining in detailed language that you can't get sample sets for qualitative research. But we estimate 25 patients would allow us to reach a good distribution of our sample size and allow us to reach thematic, I see saturation, even though sufficiency is a better term, because most readers don't understand sufficiency, even though it's a better term. So sometimes you have to play your words to your reader. And so I would say, I think that it's a really, really good point to drive home and make sure that we're aware of it. So otherwise, dealing with rejection, I also think that you want to have your friends and your people that you can go to. Sometimes just having a friend you can just vent to, so you can rage read and then rage externally at someone that's just willing to listen. And the friend who knows willing to say, you're totally right, and not give you any advice at all, and just be able to listen. Sometimes it's having the person who you can go to who will give you that critical kind of kick to say, like, I know you don't want to do this, but this is actually a better study, and here's why. Or sometimes who here has faced writer's block? Right? Sometimes, so one of my friends, Teresa Chan, I give her a shout, what she'll do with me, especially when I was early on trying and facing some writer's block, is she'd be like, Mike, we're just going to sit on a Zoom call together and you're just going to talk me through an idea and I'm going to type. And sometimes that actually worked. Like when I was like, I know what I want to say and I cannot seem to get it, and I'm saying this blank page is not landing. Sometimes it's just the person that will help you to get your ideas out that were in your brain all along, but you just didn't have a different way to get them out. But just finding your people you can go to is really helpful. This is not something that you should be like handling internally alone. Step past that, like we all get feelings of shame with it, but just moving past that and being able to be open and open. I shared with you all a couple of my losses already, and I don't have no problems with that because that's how we learn, we grow. But it also is cathartic and allows us to step back to sort of internalize it or associate ourselves with a grant that just wasn't funded, and that's okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna take a different point because the reason being, you've said so many good things, and so I feel like I need to come up with something different than that. So I agree with everything that he just said. So I'm gonna start there. And then I'm gonna say that, you went to medical school or you're going to medical school or whatever you are. You used to be somebody else, but you were still yourself, right? So you were somebody who liked to read, or you were somebody who liked to sing or jog or dance or paint, or something. And I think that for me, the best way after a major rejection of any kind is, talking to the people both within my profession and within my friend circle who may not have a clue what a grant even is, and to just like be able to go moping with them, and then we can sort of laugh about stupid things that have nothing to do with the grant topic or medicine in general. But then I really, really like to take a time where I just step away for a minute and feed my soul with, for me, it's dance. And so I like to just go take a dance class and be around like dancey people, because it transports me to a different time when I was suffering the rejection of not getting cast in a role. And that's like a whole nother way to deal with rejection. But, the thing is, you want to just kind of understand that your life is not your grant. Your life, you have other people in your life, you have other parts of your academic job, you have residents and medical students who look up to you, you have colleagues who respect you, you have friends, you have your family, and this is the time to, draw back from them, because you give them so much all the time, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask them for a little support. And the reason I'm saying this right now is because we just got asked the question, how do you handle your feelings of rejection? So that's why I'm kind of focusing on that, and that's what works for me, so.
I agree with all of that.
I know you're in the hardest position in all.
I'll change seats if you want.
I'll go first. I think it's. I want to echo that, but your life is not your grant. It may feel like it is because you spent so much time and so much, blood, sweat, tears, sleepless nights, eye strain, etc. On this grant, and you were so devoted to this idea that you're like, this, I need to do this. This is so incredibly important. It's not that it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen in this very exact specific way you had thought it was going to happen. At least not at this very moment. So I always in my head, I'm like, the answer's not necessarily no, it's not yet. And so I think for me, that reframe is really helpful. I also basically I'm like, where can I derive the most amount of joy when I'm feeling this crappy about something? And so I just go hug my dog, who does not like to be hugged. Which is fine. That's not my problem. She's 12 pounds, she has no choice. So, it's like, go hug your dog, go, do something that, and I agree with Wendy, like, go do something that brings you joy. Or, if you're like me and you're like, I just need to turn off my brain, I go crochet something while watching The Great British Bake Off or Top Chef. And that seems to work. But again, that being said, I also, when I'm having those feelings, I don't know, I'm a very determined person. So it's like, okay, the answer's not yet. I do my rage reading. I get rid of it for a couple days. And then I often will call my work wife, Lady Eris, who is very good at both the catharsis, but also the like reframing and the editing. So it's like, get out your feelings. Okay, here's what we're going to do about it. And then, I go back to the drawing board. Even if it's not going to look exactly the same, or it's not going to be, it's delayed gratification, or, I do it without any money. It's one of those things where trying to pick it up and spin it on its head, do something different with it. Like, I don't know, I need to feel somewhat productive. And even if it's only for like 20 minutes a day, that I'm going to kick this can further, up the hill. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it, but I'm also going to do things that, bring me joy and surround myself with people who, take good care of me. So.
Awesome. Any questions from the group? Anything else?
So now that you failed a lot, what would you have done differently to reduce the percentage of failure you've experienced?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, you can do it.
I can go first. So I think there's a couple of things, and I've already alluded to a couple of them. I think it's reading the mechanism a little bit more closely on a couple of things where I'm like, well, I can never make that bit. It didn't really. I think it's talking to people who know better. So reaching out to mentors, people who've been funded by the grant mechanism before. I think that's something we don't do enough of. And talk to people who've, received the grant we want to get and actually like reach out and talk to them because people are actually very willing to talk to you. And I think the other thing is, and Jamie told me to plug something we have, it's get somebody to actually edit your grant. Like a person who has nothing, yes, you. Do that with like someone who knows what they're doing, is totally not in your field, can point out the places that you've been dumb before you submit it. It's like, why would you be the only person to write your grant, read your grant, and then just send it in? Like, get other people's eyes on it. And that can be, for me, that this is gonna sound ridiculous. My husband was a basic science researcher and is now a grad school professor and a great editor, but in a completely different field. Completely different. I have him read more grants. I have had Jamie read them. I've had a whole host of different faculty, friends, people read them to be like, is this clear to you? Am I missing something? And again, you don't have to do everything that other people tell you to do. If they write you back and they're like, do this, and you're like, that's shenanigans. I'm not doing that. Don't do it.
But address it
Yes.
if you were asked to resubmit.
Yes. If the reviewers tell you to do it, but if one of your friends writes you and is like, this is, I would do blah, you're like, no. I know better than you. It's okay to, again, take the nugget of truth and then ignore the rest. But get other eyes on it. I think that is probably one of the most important things that a lot of people don't do. So for the last grant that I submitted, I had it edited. This is I submitted a letter of intent. I had it edited by 5 or 6 other people who would be on it, including like my analytics person. Lainey read it. I had a number of people who just write very differently than I do read it. It's just find your friends, colleagues, random strangers, I don't know, to read what you wrote, because it will make it exponentially better. I also tend to go way over the word limits on the first run and then hand it to other people and be like, I am too close to this. I am married to every word that's on this page. Rip it apart. Get rid of what's not necessary. Cut the fluff. And that is really, really helpful.
So, couple comments kind of building on that. I want to start at one area, which is, I don't know that we ever get a point where we're totally hitting all of our grants. We have to be okay that we're still going to have some, no matter every step along the way, you're going for more competitive grants.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll have the same fail rate. It'll just be more with harder and harder grants. The ones that are the starting grants are meant to be starting grants to bridge you to the higher level. The ones that are, we're in 2 weeks putting in a U award. And that's like a $14 million grant. That's a much harder one. What are odds of success? Well, apparently 10%, and hopefully higher. But that being said, like it's as you go up, you're still going to have failure, but that's okay. We have to accept that. I think normalize that's a normal process, so we don't feel like, oh, I'm 10 years into doing this, and I'm still not getting 100% success rate, because we're all high achievers. That's why we're in this room. We're all super achievers. We expect to be 100% A's in every class, and we get frustrated if we see an A minus. But this is not something where you're going to have 100% success rate. But that's okay. I just want to normalize that that's okay. That's part of the process, because if everyone did it, there'd be a one-to-one funding mechanism, but there isn't. There's a lot of other amazing people doing the same thing.
Yep.
And so part of it is just kind of being okay with the fact that as you're aiming higher, same with journals, right? If I throw every single paper and I get 100% hit rate in JAMA, well, that's amazing, but it's not realistic. Same point, if I throw every single paper into like the lowest tier journal that's open access, I have to pay them $50,000 per paper, I have a 100% hit rate, but I'm aiming too low. I'm aiming for a grant, in this case, and that's not giving me enough funding to do what I actually want to do. So I want to start by just normalizing that it's okay to still have low hit rates. That's a normal process as we go for higher and higher grants. The other aspect, that I would echo and kind of build on is, Holly brought up a good point about having your team. Every grant I put in, my team is writing with me. Often the PI might be the only, or the NPI, or like the main people writing might be the first writers, but I am not the last writer. No, I should take on the last one. So I'm the sandwich basically. I'm like this and this, but everyone between that, I'm getting constant feedback from my team and having them pick it apart and being as brutal as possible because I want them to do it rather than review. I'm having friendly fire. Early on, especially when I like first started writing grants, I was tapping people who were much, much smarter than me and saying, shred my grants. And they're like, okay, I'll send you comments. I was like, no, I want as much red as possible. Give me like the red lines of love where you just kind of just shred the whole thing up. I want that because I'm going to learn and have a better grant as a result of it. And I think that, again, normalizing that you should, from every single person, have a bunch of red lines. If you're getting something back that gives you a thumbs up, that's great. They may feel like they're doing a service by giving you a really positive thumbs up and we feel good for our ego, but in reality, they're doing a disservice. And so I challenge everyone on my team, and I encourage that, I build that mindset that your job is to be the reviewer too, and completely find every single minor or major flaw that you can think of in here. Not just grammar, identify gaps, push me to be the best I can, push the grant to be the best I can. And I do find that helps me not only this grant, but all the future ones, because I start to pick up on those errors, and then it'll happen next time.
Just another tiny little add-on comment that sometimes your grant gets rejected because there's something that the grantors, feel is deficient that isn't objectively deficient, okay? So perhaps they really want to make sure that their 19 or 14 billion or million dollars, whatever
I
your
know I can do 14 billion.
yeah, okay. Well, like whatever your number is, that's like they worked really hard to get that money, and they want to make sure that they get a really reliable return on their investment. So while you may be picking on you because you just asked the question, as it could be anybody here.
Intentionally, yeah.
Yeah. So you may be the foremost expert on the topic of your grant, but they don't know you from a hole in the wall, okay? So then, let's say that, you ran into Mike Gottlieb in the hall and he asks you about your grant and like they funded him before. He knows not one thing about your grant, but they know that he knows how to take their money and turn it into something that is noteworthy. Maybe now you put him on your team, and if he's willing, so that he's a person that they can count on because they've had experience. These are typically people like your mentors. Sometimes it's a person outside of your discipline. If you're an emergency medicine physician and you're applying for a federal grant from an NIH agency, from an NIH institute, like if you are applying for a grant that comes from, like say, the neurosciences, NCBI, or whatever. I'm just blanking on the initials at the moment. And you're emergency medicine, and they're used to funding neurologists, neurosurgeons, and psychiatrists. You're not gonna get that grant, even if it's the best written grant, because they don't know what you're gonna do with all that money. But if you pull in one of those people, suddenly your grant score goes way, way down. And this is like golf, right? A low score is better than a high score. So all of those kinds of components, I'm just pulling out the collaborator, but there's any number of components. Does your institution have a facility for you to do this? Does your institution have access to, whatever it is that you're trying to study? Is that readily accessible, and is it documented in your grant application that you have that available to use, and that the grantor doesn't have to fund that on the side, for example, and that you're not gonna pass, you're not gonna get your paper done and your study done because that's missing. So all of those support things that have nothing to do with your intellect or ability in your perception to complete the grant which like honestly, you know, you could without all these silly little things. These are the things that reassure the grantors that you are worthy, and that you are going to be reliable. So that, you know, past performance in their mind is indicative of future performance.
I also
Future
want to
returns.
note, make sure that it's not buried in your institution's boilerplate facilities packet. Yeah, right. Which is like 40 pages long. You're like, none of this is relevant.
And to add to that piece, the facilities page that you always get, that is meant to be edited. That should almost never go in as a copy of what the institution gives you, tailored to you. When you put it in there as this 40-page thing, first of all, it makes the grant really long, and they get bored by the time they read the important stuff. But also, it highlights nothing, right? It's a bunch of noise and no signal. So I usually carve ours, which is 28 pages, down to about 7. That's just focused on things that are relevant. Like I can trim the library section, the parts that are relevant to my library, and maybe not the surrounding neighborhoods that I'm not actually going to, or I'll condense it in, make it more focused in. I'm not going to talk about the wet lab because I'm not doing wet lab research. It all takes away from there. But now that may shift a little bit. For example, when I put in a small grant looking at like systematic review, the scoping review method, my library section was way longer because that was directly relevant to what I'm doing. It's not background and comment applied science. Now it's like this is actually like here's my collaborative relationship with 22 combined publications with our medical librarian. Here's the robustness. Here's the infrastructure. You're going to tailor that not just to the boilerplate, but individualized to the grant, and it makes it a much more successful tech model.
And another thing is, you know, you write your NIH biosketch, right? So now you're done, right? Wrong.
Revise.
Every single time you write a grant, you rewrite your biosketch as if you were born to do that grant. Then you go to your mentor, either your trusted handy dandy mentor, or you look outside for a mentor that could be good for this particular study. And guess what? They have their handy dandy NIH biosketch. Nope, that's not good enough anymore too. They need you to rewrite theirs to submit with your grant, which focuses on the topic of your grant, and that will improve your chances of getting funded for that grant. So I think we were starting this whole long thing about reducing the number of rejections that you get. So these are, I think we beat this one to death.
Other questions?
How do you handle it when you get very discordant comments from reviewers? In some cases, completely conflicting comments, especially reviewer 3. It's always reviewer 3.
So depends to some degree. If you're going to be resubmitting, like let's say it has a score that's at least in a potential to get into a fundable range, you're going to talk to the grant agents, like whether it's the PO, or whoever your contact person is going to be for post review, or I guess that's SRO in that case. But you're going to talk to the person there and just ask them, like, hey, I got these discordant comments. Usually they're in the room, or they at least know the room. And so they'll be able to give you that kind of like backstory. The same way you talk to an editor, if you have two discordant reviews in a paper, you're going to say, reviewers 2 says expand this, reviewer 3 says cut this section. What do you want me to do? Mm-hmm. You might get that feedback from them. Like, what do you think is going to land better? They're not the one who ultimately makes the decision, but they're the one who was in the room can hopefully give you the feedback of what you can do there. I think the other thing is just, again, relying on others, whether it be your team, whether it be mentors. We should have lifelong mentors. So it doesn't matter how many years you're in your career, you should always have mentors. But reaching out to your mentors and saying, like, here are these 2 comments. I'm going to resubmit elsewhere, but as you read these, what do you think I should do? Like, one says to go this way, one says to go this way. I can only pick one direction. What do you think would land, right? I find that it just depends a little bit on those pathways. It is useful in general to have someone that's not in the grant look at this, because when the grant is so vested, you're almost too close to it. It's like everyone's kids are perfect. My kids are perfect. But like when you're like stepped away, like you're like, I need my kids' teachers to tell me like they're great, but she sometimes draws her 6 backwards. Like I need someone to be able to tell me the things that I wouldn't necessarily see as well because I'm so close to this grant. It's my child. It's my thing I'm focused on. And have someone that can give you that, like, yeah, maybe actually they were right. You go that way.
Or you can use, sometimes it isn't so clear cut where one says make it longer, says make it shorter. Sometimes they read what you wrote and each one offers maybe a conflicting interpretation of what you intended. So what you can do with that in a revision or a resubmission is to say, I wrote this thinking that I meant this, but clearly when somebody read it, some of them thought this and some of them thought that, and I meant this. Like, how can I streamline my message so that when somebody over here reads it, that they can be satisfied that my method is going to address their comment, while at the same time, this person who's on the diametrically opposed side is going to feel like they've been heard as well. We considered letting interns stay in the hospital for their entire internship year in 2025, but decided that this would lead to increased burnout, when they said, you should keep the interns in the hospital all year, right? And then when they read that, they're like, okay, yeah, they considered that, all right, whatever. And, then these are the reasons because burnout or something, so just, if you can, anytime you can kind of determine what people are going to be saying as a critique of your grant, and if it fits in with the logical flow of your application, to just address that up front. And I would say that's mostly for a grant that's already been reviewed and you're resubmitting. Because you don't want to just kind of come in with a brand new grant that has like, well, what if this, what if this, what if this? They're going to be like, what if we don't fund you? Go away. This is too disjointed. But that would be a good strategy for specific feedback and how to incorporate both.
If the section chair did their job,
Yeah, right. There you go.
there should be synthetic comments at the top that tell you what they want you to do. Same as, if the decision editor did their job, you get the Discord review back on paper. If they didn't, sad face.
Is she looking at you on that one?
I don't know. I'm not talking to her.
Just
I get this is anything.
No, yes, you do it. No, I was not letting you go. I can think of other people though. But you can. I very much feel that you can write back and say and try and get either the section chair or someone put you in touch with the section chair and say, hey, which of these should I attend to? And if you want me to attend to both in some way, shape, or form, like how do you want me to approach that? You were there. You were in the discussion. Is one of these people like completely out of line, or are they loony? Or do you kind of agree with this, but you also kind of agree with this? Like which way do you want me to go? I will say, I should call this person out because it was just so kind. This was a paper that I wrote, so this was not a grant. But Sally Sand, who is an absolute delight, actually called me after I submitted a paper, and she was the decision editor on it, and she was like, okay, you got all these comments back. She's like, I don't agree with half of them. She's like, so I don't want you to actually address them. She's like, what were you trying to say with this paper specifically? What do you care the most about getting home to people? And I was like, well, it's this. And she was like, then here's exactly what I want you to do for this revision. She's like, that way I'm going to save you a bunch of time and headache, and you're just going to do this. Again, there are people on the other end. Most of them are normal. If you get someone who's not normal, no, that's on them. But just reach out to people. It's just so much easier. It's like when the IRB is being insane. It's easier to just pick up the phone and be like, what do you actually want? What do you want from me? Because this is what you're asking for, and then what you come back with is two completely different things. You make no sense. Just tell me what you want. So I don't know. It's one of those things as a millennial, I hate talking to people on the phone, but the easiest thing to do is pick up the phone or reach out and be like, can you connect me with a human being, not your AI bot, to tell me what you actually want. So I won't spend the rest of my life and all of the hair I have left dealing with this. What else?
What are your thoughts on including unfunded grants on your resume? So,
Can you clarify what you mean by unfunded grants?
Like you applied, but you didn't get selected for funding.
Does it have a score?
Does it say I'm running across this right now for the first time, actually, that I have
Yeah,
a
I
perfect
guess-
score that is not going to get funded because of the government.
Yeah, between that and then also like if your institution is part of like a P&T want to see you submitting for grants, regardless if you get them or not, what would be the recommendation for including that on like a more global CV? Like, is there value in showing you're applying for grants knowing that you're not getting them all versus just showing the ones that you are getting, but that's generally a fraction of the work that you're putting into it versus
If your
is it
institution
setting
cares
yours?
about it, yeah, if your institution cares about it for P&T, then I would just have a section that says unfunded grants. If they keep the score, like I applied for this, this is like one line, what it was about, here's the score. So they know, is like, if you're putting in all this work
Yeah.
and you're getting scored and you're just not getting money, particularly in this climate, like, I think you should tell them.
We're starting to see grants come back that say, in a normal environment, we would have funded this without question.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah,
that's,
right,
that's, a,
Q1
that's the
still
worst
works.
protection there. So how do you,
Yeah.
it's like, say, oh, I want to celebrate.
Well, we
It's
don't
great,
have
not-
we don't have any of those answers.
It's horrible.
Yeah, I'll
Or
say,
I'm gonna like print it out and light it on fire.
or wallpaper. But no, I'll say I write about 20 or 30 PhD letters every year, and so I tend to see the other end of it from a wide breadth of institutions. I would say that 75% of them tend to list the unfunded in the P&Ts, but I rarely see that in the CV outside of the P&T application.
Gotcha.
So it's like, well, never a P&T or non-P&T version. What I don't think any of us have a good sense of, or at least I don't, is how yet to list the ones that are defunded. I have one defunded grant.
Yeah.
I currently list in there with italics saying it was funded and then governmentally pulled back, and it's just italicized with it was funded. So I keep it on my CV right now. I don't know that I have a better way of doing that. I hope I don't have to build a whole section for it because right now it's just one grant. But I imagine that we're gonna have to like come to a consensus of what we agree with. But if you got funded and this was governmentally funded or something else there should be some way that's recognized because that's an accomplishment. That's also something that you probably want to put in your back pocket and go back to in a few years, as we are going to be doing with several other vaccination effort initiatives that will go in future cycles.
I mean, I would say it's the exact same thing as, when COVID happened, all those
Right.
presentations that got
Right.
canceled. Like, what?
Yeah, it was accepted.
Yeah, it was accepted. I would have given it had this conference actually happened. So now they come back and they're like, where was the conference supposed to be? And you're like, oh my God, I don't know.
And I'll say for P&T, it does help. Like, it depends. So if you have like 25 grants, it probably doesn't have that much value.
Right.
But for the vast majority of people, that's this is something that adds value to your CV. It says, does this person either I could write in the research section and say, they had X million dollars or X $100,000 of funding, and they also submitted 5 grants, 3 were scored, 1 was fairly funded. I can it gives things to say like, look how productive this person is. That's awesome. It's easier to have things that I can as a writer brag about on your behalf and be able to highlight and emphasize when I say this person meets outstanding in this category, then they're not having it. And we don't, just like similar to what was brought up about grants earlier, is that if it's not there, no one knows about it.
And for
Don't
your
let-
chair, too. Chairs have the job of managing all different aspects of a department, operations, education, research, and they have the whole administration arm, and there's any number of different moving parts at the same time. And they may be like, oh yeah, I know that, she's over there, I know she's doing some stuff related to grants. Yeah, that's good. Every year when I would go in for my meeting, with the chair, where they look to see what you accomplished in the last year and help you set your vision for, those meetings would come with a sheet of paper saying, these were the grants that I applied for. These are the, and then you can make a table, just like a 1-page table. These are the grants I applied for. These got funded. Well, maybe this got funded in a particular year. And this is the state of this particular project right now. I plan to apply for blah, blah, blah. in the next 6 months. And, you know, after careful consideration, I've decided to table this idea until, you know, there's, you know, more support available by a different means. Like give me more academic time, for example, so that I don't need to get external funding. Maybe you can just give me another 2 days a month off shift, and then I can like produce the research out of your department that you want me to do. Yes, so.
I think we are out of time. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our
Oh, wow.
panel. That was amazing.